Hello, I'm Larry Sabato, Director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, and it's my pleasure to welcome one of the filmmakers of All In, the Fight for Democracy. And boy, is that timely and appropriate in the fall of 2020. All over again. Oscar-nominated Lisa Cortez. Lisa here has over 20 films on her resume, including Woodsman, Shadow Boxer, Tennessee, and Precious, which was nominated for 6 Academy Awards and received 2 Oscars. How is there enough room on your shelf? I don't know. We are also joined by a dear friend. I'm not going to say old friend. I'm just going to say dear friend. Congressman Bobby Scott, who represents the 3rd District of Virginia. Congressman Scott served in the Virginia House of Delegates, the Virginia State Senate. He was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1992, and he's Virginia's senior member of Congress. He's also Mr. Chairman. He is chairman of the Committee on Education and Labor, and we're very proud of him. Thank you for being with us today, both of you. Lisa, if I can start with you. This is such a powerful film that pulls the skin back on voter suppression. You see the ugly reality, the undercurrent that exists in so many places, certainly Georgia, but we're seeing it all over the country as we prepare for the presidential election. How did this documentary come about, and how did you come to work on this project?
Hi, Larry. It's a pleasure to be in conversation with you today. The inception of this project was Stacey Abrams. After the Georgia 2018 elections, she realized that she wanted to find a broader storytelling medium to explore the history of voter rights and voter suppression and the insidious nature of what it is. And so she went and met with several filmmakers and landed upon a team of myself and my fellow director and Emmy-winning and Oscar-nominated Liz Garbus. And we collaborated with Stacey as a producer to lay out this history. It's a cautionary tale, but also to offer a call to action.
Well, it is a call to action. Anybody who watches this film doesn't just want to turn to friends or family in the room watching it with them and just say, isn't that terrible? You want to get up off the couch and do something. And of course, this is the season for doing something. Let me ask Congressman Scott, because he has had such a history of dealing with voter suppression and also with voting and civil rights. I know that many other states suffer from varying types of voter suppression. Congressman, what do you see as the biggest concerns around the country? Virginia is in a better place than certainly it was when you and I started out back in the 60s and 70s. But there's still some problems here, but there are bigger problems elsewhere. How do you assess the situation as we move towards the presidential election?
Well, one of the things that I find really disconcerting is the fact that the Republicans have essentially adopted voter suppression as a party strategy. It's no longer a secret. They're no longer apologetic about it. They just do it. I mean, every step of the way, it's just part, just like, get out the vote. Voter suppression is part of their strategy. Members of the Republican Party are not revolting and say, wait a minute, that's not fair. That's cheating. I mean, you have in Houston, the Republican governor wanted to limit the drop boxes in all of Houston to 1 drop box. And there's no embarrassment. I mean, that's just, they're in court back and forth of whether or not people in Houston, you have a small county, 1 drop box, all of Houston, 1 drop box. It's not secret. The Supreme Court, one of the appellate courts looked at the North Carolina Republican voter laws and said that they went after African Americans with, quote, surgical procedure. They had the analysis of the impact on the minority vote of all of their proposals, and the only ones they passed were those that had an adverse effect. And again, there's no embarrassment. I would have thought that statesmen within the party would say, hey, whoa, that's, I don't want to be associated with that. You can't do that. But there is no embarrassment. It's just part of their strategy. And that is really the most disconcerting thing. I would hope that people would look at the movie, recognize what some of us who are working at it every day have known for some time, that this is part of the Republican strategy, and say this is just not fair, and we're not going to vote for anybody that participates in that kind of shenanigans.
And that's the key, Congressman. It's always up to the voters in the end. And what amazes me is that Republicans are doing this in a way that nearly guarantees an ever diminishing share of minority voters. And yet they claim after every election they want to do better. And they complain about the fact that they're only getting, as in Trump's case in 2016, 8% of the black vote. Well, there's a connection here. If it's clear that you don't want people to vote, then when they do vote, probably they're going to hold that against you. Most people resent that kind of thing. You mentioned the Texas example, and at least we're going to get back to Georgia in a second. But this is the most outrageous thing that I have seen in decades, and there have been plenty of outrageous things. One drop box for votes for each county in Texas, mandated by the Republican governor of Texas. As you mentioned, Houston, Harris County, with millions of people, has one drop box. And all of these rural counties with a handful of people has one drop box. And probably even for them, it's not enough, one drop box. But for Harris County, it's an outrage. And judges, I think, bear a lot of responsibility here for not standing up when they had the opportunity and saying, this is wrong. Under the Constitution, this is wrong, whatever the Texas law is. Lisa, as you look at Georgia, first of all, I want you to tell the audience your impressions of Stacey Abrams. And then, having told this story so well, what do you want people to take away from it as they maybe turn the observations into action?
Sure. As I mentioned earlier, Stacey saw that what happened in the 2018 gubernatorial run in Georgia as kind of the foundation for a story that was bigger than Georgia. As she always says, it's not that she didn't win, it's that the people of Georgia were denied the fair access to the ballot. And so in constructing the story of this film, it was important for us to use Stacey's individual story, her parents who were ministers, the ideals that they instilled in her role as a young activist at Spelman, and just what it means for a poor Black woman from the South to run for the governor of Georgia. What we have seen with her story is that it then allows us to go into the bigger history, to toggle into from the individual to the national perspective. And I think, that is, as storytellers, is how you create empathy. Because you might not like Stacey, you might feel like, she lost, she's a sore loser. But when you see the connection between the individual's history and our national history, a history that is based on a foundation that was not about we the people, that some of the people were considered 3/5 of a human, that those are kind of the components that Stacey's story brought. And Stacey, as a leader, looks at, but also is actively finding ways to engage communities that had not been, she says, meeting people where they are and bringing them into the process.
Well, it's amazing to me given the way Georgia is structured and given the fact that you had a Republican administration in Georgia and a Republican Secretary of State, as you pointed out in the film, who, by the way, just happened to be the Republican nominee for governor. How about that? And the decisions were made, every decision seemed to play into his theme, but yet Stacey Abrams almost won. It is, to me, an amazing story of possibilities, even with loads and loads of problems added in for anybody who has a progressive vision in the South. And it applies not just to the South. Would you agree? There are plenty of northern states that have problems too, and they often say, look at the South. No, it's everybody.
No, there's been egregious parties all over. And truly the past is prologue, to this moment that we find ourselves in. But one thing that we can learn from the past is that progress does happen. There is the promise of reconstruction. There is the pushback and violence, intimidation that follows. But then we, have the 15th Amendment. We have the 19th Amendment. We have the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We would not have seen, I think, so much of a great fallout in 2016 if we hadn't had Shelby v. Holder, because that opened the floodgates and that started the poll closures, the purging, all of the things that then, when Black and brown folks went to the polls in 2016 and there was that intimidation, they were told they weren't registered. I think that is, a direct correlation of Shelby v. Holder and a lot of what happened in that last election, particularly with the BIPOC communities.
And the push and pull of voting rights in American history, it's always 2 steps forward, 1.5 steps back, 2 steps forward. Maybe I'm being too optimistic, but gradually you make progress. But boy, there's also regression in there too, frequently.
Well, because it's about power. And as the changing demographics of this country are occurring, there are those of a particular party and race who are intent on holding on to their power.
Mr. Chairman, Congressman Scott, I'm trying to work all your titles into this. As you've been at this a long time, you've studied it, you've acted on it, and you've been in the trenches. I mean, it's tough to get elected and to get reelected and reelected. There are always new circumstances. As you look at the big picture, what are the 2 or 3 best changes that we could push for, work for politically that would ease this problem, would make voter suppression, if not a thing of the past, then at least more rare?
Well, I think Lisa just mentioned Shelby v. Holder. That really unleashed a lot of the problems. It essentially eliminated the Section 5 pre-clearance under the Voting Rights Act. Pre-clearance meant that the states and localities that had been shown to be problematic had to pre-clear any voting change before they could go into effect. Had to be, they had the burden of proof to prove to the Justice Department that the change was not discriminatory. Okay, the afternoon, and once the decision came down, everyone was essentially free of the pre-clearance requirement. You know how valuable it was because the afternoon of the decision, the very afternoon, Republican officials in Texas and North Carolina were proclaiming the fact that, oh good, now we can pass these laws. Now, that statement only makes any sense if they could not pass them before because they couldn't get pre-clearance because they were discriminatory. Now they can pass them because they're not subject to pre-clearance. And that really unleashed a lot of suppression. Now we're talking suppression, not denial. They're not denying anybody the vote. They're just, on all these close elections, you don't have to deny people the vote. You just have to make it a little more complicated so that every 1,000 people, a little more complicated, got to stand in line. A few people will drop out of line. If a few people drop out, that little margin will make the difference. And all these voter suppression, there's no question in anybody's mind that had they not invoked voter suppression techniques, that Stacey Abrams would be governor of Georgia today. So regrettably, it works. And pre-clearance worked. It eliminated a lot of mischief. You talked about a couple of steps forward, a couple of steps back, but you don't take the backward steps because you can't get them pre-cleared. And you have to just recognize what the value of pre-clearance does. It puts the burden on the state. You know, on the statewide stuff, you know, you can raise enough money and deal with it. It's on the county level where you have a redistricting plan, or you have other things like one drop box, where you may not, where the local NAACP branch with $83 in the budget can't bring $1 million lawsuit. They don't know how, they have to first do the analysis to show that it's discriminatory. Then they have to hire a lawyer, file a lawsuit. Then they have to win. All of that takes time. Meanwhile, the change is in effect. People have been elected. They're legislated. When you finally find that it was they cheated, they get to run as incumbents rather than as challengers. All of that was eliminated by virtue of pre-clearance. The one drop box in Houston never would have been pre-cleared, and they couldn't have done that. And so, I think the one thing that we could do would be to overturn Shelby v. Holder or reinstate pre-clearance, so that all these people participating in voter suppression can be forced to pre-clear their initiatives, so that they are not so that the backward steps do not take place.
Congressman Scott, you've been there. You've watched this. Let's suppose the Democrats win the presidency. The Democrats win the Senate, even if it's close, even if it's 50-50 with Vice President Kamala Harris breaking the ties. And as just about everybody agrees, the Democrats keep the House, whether with an expanded margin or about what you have today. So you've got control of those three. Can pre-clearance be a priority, and how would you go about doing it?
Well, we can pass laws. We have to, first of all, get something that we can get past the House and the Senate to be signed by the president. When you have to go through a Republican Senate, when their strategy relies on voter suppression, it's just virtually impossible to do anything so long as you have a party in power whose strategy is voter suppression. You're not going to pass any laws that make things any better. So once you will see what happens, same thing happened in Virginia when Democrats took over both the House of Delegates and State Senate after the last election. They were able to pass laws that liberalized voter ID laws so that they weren't as restrictive. We installed early vote and a number of other things that made it easier to vote rather than harder to vote, right on a dime. And you've seen early vote. When 7 million people had voted nationally, almost 1 million of them had voted in the Commonwealth of Virginia, because people can now vote. So if we can take over the Senate and the presidency and maintain the House, I think we'll be able to go a long way into promoting vote as a right, and not all these little voter suppression things. And certainly we'd be able to deal with Shelby v. Holder to make sure that those scoundrels who have been promoting voter suppression laws will finally have to pre-clear, like they had to for decades, any backward steps, so that we only go forward in terms of voting, not backwards.
Yes, and Godspeed and good luck on that one. And it may happen. We're both from Virginia. And if Virginia can change like that, the country can too. Any state can change if Virginia can. Lisa, let me quickly go to you because this was such an important film. This is such a powerful film that everyone should watch. If you had to summarize it in one critical lesson that everyone watching us right now and everyone who views the film should take away in order to see some positive action and progress, what would that one lesson be?
Well, I think the mantra that we always hear is that if your voice didn't matter, why are these forces trying so hard to stop us from voting? It matters, it's essential, and I think, as James Brown would say, we have to get into it and get involved. And it is voting season. It is a season that is not just about the president, it is also about the down ballot candidates and issues. And what I'm enjoying in this season is the range of folks who are signing up to become poll workers. And if people want to figure out how to navigate things, we have an incredible website, allinforvoting.com. But, in this season, this is just the beginning of our engagement, because, this one election is hopefully going to wipe out, and move us towards the equity and reckoning that we are all yearning for. But there is still great work to be done. And the courts won't save us. The people are going to save us. And it is our time to not only show up early or day of, but to continue to let your representatives know if they are reflective of what is important to your community and the change that you want to see made.
And Lisa, I think it's actually happening. And usually I'm a pessimist, but I actually think it's happening. So I want to salute you. Yeah, well, you think?
Well, that's a lot coming from you, Larry. And your purview and your handicapping, that means so much to me, and to all of the people who have boots on the ground. Dr. King said, you got to march in the streets, but you also have to march at the ballot boxes. And I'm hoping that everything that we are doing is not in vain.
I honestly don't believe it's in vain. And I can't say that every year. Of course, as Congressman Bobby Scott can tell you, very, very rarely, very, very occasionally, I've been wrong. And Bobby, you don't need to go into the particulars. We can just agree on that. Let's stipulate that. But Lisa, good luck on your continuing career, which has been remarkable. And I know all of your future projects will be just as powerful as this film was. And Congressman Bobby Scott, as I've always said, you're the man. You get things done. You keep the big boys honest, and we're all very proud of you.
Well,
thank you so. Go ahead, Bobby.
Thank you, Larry, and keep up the good work. Your course at the University of Virginia Center for Politics encourages the next generation to get involved. So keep up the good work.
I really appreciate that, Bobby. Thank you so much. And that's it for now, although your next step is not watching, it's doing. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.